Martin Heidegger, born in Meschik, Germany on September 26, 1889, was deeply influenced by his conservative rural upbringing. Initially drawn to theology, he later turned to philosophy, studying under prominent thinkers like Husserl and engaging deeply with Aristotle, Kant, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche. Heidegger's philosophy underwent a significant shift known as the turn, characterized by reorientation in his thinking towards the question of being. Martin Heidegger is known for his book Being and Time, where he poses a fundamental question often overlooked. What does it mean to exist? Being and time has been an important tool for explaining phenomenological and existential philosophy. Phenomenology being the actual phenomena that we experience, what we see, taste, smell, touch, hear, and feel, and existentialism being the emphasis on individuals' existence, freedom, and choice that we all experience as human individuals. To address the oversight, Heidegger distinguishes between the ontic, concerned with facts about entities, and the ontological, concerned with the meaning of being. He asserts that the history of philosophy has ontocized being, failing to grasp its true essence. Thus, he proposes a reorientation towards a fundamental ontology which investigates the a priori conditions underlying different modes of being. He argues that we typically interact with things as tools or equipments rather than just seeing them as objects. For example, when we use a hammer, we don't usually think about the hammer itself, we're focused on the task of hammering. This way of encountering things, which Heidegger calls readiness to hand, is interesting. When we're smoothly using tools, they kind of disappear from our awareness. We're absorbed in the activity, not thinking about the objects themselves. It's like when you're driving a car, you're not constantly thinking about the car, you're focused on the road and the act of driving. However, there's another mode of encounter, which Heidegger calls presence at hand. This happens when something disrupts our smooth activity, like a broken tool. Suddenly, we're forced to notice the tool as an object separate from our activity. This mode is more like the way we typically think about objects, as things with specific properties. There's also a middle ground called unreadiness to hand, where things are still seen in relation to our activities, but are somehow disrupted or not working properly. For example, when a driver gets a flat tire, suddenly the tire becomes a problem to solve rather than just part of the car. Heidegger's analysis challenges the idea that our encounter with the world are always subject-object relationships. He suggests that sometimes, especially when we're deeply engaged in activities, we're not really thinking about ourselves as subjects separate from objects. This challenges traditional views of how we perceive and interact with the world. We are familiar with Descartes' approach to existence. According to him, the fact that we have thought proves that we exist. Heidegger notices a flaw in his reasoning. This cannot be the first proof of our existence. There has to be something before that. Before you think, you have to be. Simply being is the very first human experience that we have. This simple being that he is talking about before thought is ultimately what he is referring to as das Sein. By creating this new word, Heidegger wanted to leave the prior philosophical baggage behind and focus on being as being in the world. He rejected the ideology that the subject and object, a person and the world, as separate entity. He views being as being hyphenated in the world. You can't be without the world. The world around us and being as ourselves are completely interlinked and necessary for one another. But why did Heidegger care about this in the first place? He saw the fundamental flaws within Enlightenment era philosophy, specifically regarding the ontology of it. Ontology being the philosophical study of the nature of being and existence, and it mainly focuses on questions surrounding whether or not something may exist. People have always been concerned about what existed without fully knowing what existence was. Being presupposes everything. It is the backdrop for every single thing in our lives and comes before every concept that we know. Heidegger notices that people go about their lives in a robotic way because they blur things out. This world is made up of concepts and tools. The more people interact with these tools and concepts, the more they become unimportant. We do this with definitions, languages, relationships. Heidegger points out that we have a tendency to live what we call the everydayness. The everydayness is often what separates the inauthentic human experience and the authentic human experience. One's sense of self, of what one is to do with their life and how one is supposed to live, usually is given from the outside and an authentic experience of life. Heidegger calls this inauthenticity of life verfallen, which translates into fallenness. He is trying to elaborate on the everydayness of our life, in which Dasein's immersion of the world and our being in the world revolves around menial traditions, rituals, and social expectations that society imprints on us. But according to Heidegger, there is a being in which we escape verfallen, and we can look past the everydayness of life. He calls this befindlichkeit, which translates roughly into how one finds oneself. Basically, we are thrown into the world from birth, a birth that no one really asked for, called thrownness. This is where we get into the existentialism of Heidegger. He calls this mode of understanding our being Verstehen, which translates to understanding. This mainly points toward the infinite amount of possibilities that we have in our lives within the finite span of time. On the opposite of the finite spectrum of life, we have das Nicht, or nothing, or death. Heidegger saw the realization of the finite span of time that we have as the ultimate gateway towards authenticity and being in the world. Understanding time and our place within it means understanding Dasein. I think that Heidegger's concept of authenticity challenges us to confront our own existence and make choices that align with our individuality and potentiality. His analysis of everydayness versus authenticity prompts reflection on the way in which societal norms and cultural conditioning can obscure our true selves, urging us to strive for a more genuine and fulfilling existence. In essence, time is the form of human life according to Heidegger. The structural moments where we contend with time mentally is what he calls a temporal ecstasy. Temporal ecstasy refers to Dasein's mode of existing in time. Heidegger argues that Dasein is always stretched out between its past, present, and future. Dasein does not simply exist statically in the present moment, but is always oriented towards its past and future. Heidegger's understanding of unity is extremely important on a physical and non-physical level. Further, the structure of Heideggerian philosophy analytics showed that concepts and things cannot exist without you, since existence only exists within our perception, and the reality without our perception is completely irrelevant to our existence. Heidegger expresses a type of specialness in human being, and this is something we should not take for granted. We should be fully aware of our unity, our closeness, and conceptual relationship with concepts. Understanding this vulnerability of ourselves is what will create a more authentic human and authentic life. Heidegger delves into the topic of death and being and time to understand human existence better. He believes that grasping our relationship with death is crucial for understanding ourselves fully. However, there's a problem. We can't experience our own death, so how do we understand it? Heidegger suggests that we can understand death by observing others' deaths, but he argues that this isn't enough. We can feel sad when someone dies, but we can't truly grasp what it means to lose one's own existence. Instead, Heidegger proposes that we always carry the possibility of our own death with us, even though it hasn't happened yet. This awareness of death as a looming possibility shapes how we live and understand our lives. Heidegger uses authenticity and inauthenticity as ways of dealing with death. In the authentic approach, we confront the idea of our own non-existence directly, realizing that our lives are finite. In contrast, the inauthentic response involves avoiding the topic or fearing death, which prevents us from truly understanding its significance. Heidegger talks about two things: the things around us and how we deal with them, and how we figure out what's true about these things. He says that our cultural habits shape how we deal with things, but when we look at something in a scientific way, we might find out truths that are the same no matter where we come from. But here's where it gets tricky. Heidegger says our historical background matters a lot. Even our scientific truths are tied to our specific time and place. This makes it seem like there's no such thing as one universal, unchanging truth. Heidegger talks about the truth in three ways. There's the original truth, which is like uncovering something hidden. Then there's practical truth, which is about being good at doing things. And finally, there's the kind of truth we usually think about when a statement matches up with reality. But some philosophers disagree with Heidegger. They say his idea of original truth doesn't really hold up because it mixes up what we intend and what's actually true. And his idea of time makes things even more complicated. He says our experience of time affects how we see the world, blurring the line between what's true for just us and what's true for everyone. Heidegger also studied the soul in its most lonely state, in a state of great and deep boredom. Treating boredom as an existential state of the soul, the philosopher followed the same analysis, treating anxiety just like Kierkegaard. But he pushed the argument further. Heidegger thought that man becomes more and more impoverished internally. This state makes man feel afraid, and this fear is a state of the soul, that is, of man, that is, of his being, of his existence. Heidegger studied the state of anxiety closely related to fear and observed three stages. The first stage is the state before fear. The second stage is being afraid, and the third stage is understanding why you are afraid. The analysis of the state of fear and anxiety is a product of the personal crisis, but also the social one that was associated with the time when the philosopher published his work. But this state of fear and anxiety leads one to seek other states. Heidegger therefore put himself at the head of a movement aimed at changing the state of the bourgeois order and creating a new state. Heidegger's work challenges conventional views of truth and reality, pushing us to reconsider our understanding of existence. His exploration of concepts like Dasein, authenticity, and temporality offers a thought-provoking perspective on the human experience. While his ideas may be complex and sometimes controversial, they spark important conversations about the nature of being and our place in the world. Thank you.